Hello and welcome. Coming up tonight, can the Prime Minister survive the chaos of his own making? I'll ask his Chief Secretary, Darren Jones. Can Donald Trump survive the publication of the Epstein files? I'll ask his old mate, Piers Morgan. Pippa and Screeny know whether the budget will make you richer or poorer.
The Chancellor is doing the fiscal hokey-cokey, with rate rises out, but threshold freezes locked in.
And throughout the show, deciding which of our leaders will face a Bush-Tucker trial and who'll be voted out of the jungle, Labour's Becky Long-Bailey and the ex-Tory Minister Jacob Rees-Mogg. Watcher, now probably the most heartfelt thing said by the Prime Minister in this past week of government chaos was how joyful he felt at that wonder goal scored for Scotland by the former Arsenal defender Kieran Tierney. It was revealing, and not just because of Keir Starmer's passion for Arsenal, which is authentic. KT, against the odds, found the ball at his feet, didn't fluff it, and sent Scotland on their way to the World Cup finals. If only you could see etched in Starmer's face, Farage and Polanski would stop hogging the political ball so that Starmer too could score a wonder goal. Perhaps then Starmer's MPs would stop their agonised muttering about whether they'd do better with a different team captain. The point is, politics, like football, is 10% or thereabouts loyalty, 90% results. And once you're seen as an irredeemable loser by the fans or voters or those you work with, you're toast. Never mind that only 16 months ago you won the Premier League, or in Keir Starmer's case, a spectacular election victory. If your team is facing relegation, or if you as an MP are going to lose your seat, you'll want the boss to be kicked out. So can anything salvage Keir Starmer's career? The big test is next week's budget. The build-up has been, how can I put it, calamitous. The Chancellor and Treasury prepared us for the mother of all fiscal black holes, the betrayal of an important manifesto promise, and the pain of a rise in the basic rate of income tax. And then, on Friday, they all said, whoops, it's really not so bad. When Rachel Reeves reveals all next Wednesday, goodness knows whether we'll feel relieved or let down, and whether those who lend to the government will feel buoyed or betrayed. That judgment of voters, creditors and investors will determine the fate of the boss, Keir Starmer. That is whether the scheming against him will abate or whether it will accelerate. Only 7 more sleeps to find out. Pippa.
It's been one of the bumpiest run-ups to a budget that I can remember, and the day itself will be a moment of great peril for Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves. The Chancellor needs her speech to land without any more drama, especially when the public have already made up their minds over who to blame for their economic woes. This polling by Ipsos shows that almost 60% of voters, the biggest group, blame the Prime Minister and Chancellor for the poor state of the economy. That's way more than the 42% who blame the previous Tory government. The other factors the government points to, COVID, Brexit, Ukraine, are all there, with 46% pointing to leaving the EU. Maybe that's why the government finally feels comfortable talking about the impact. External factors like the state of the global economy and Donald Trump's actions feature a bit lower. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Reeves is now the least popular Chancellor in the last 30 years, with approval ratings of just 11%, 1 point below Kwasi Kwarteng, who delivered Liz Truss's ill-fated mini-budget. Keir Starmer will also be willing on his Chancellor, as their fates seem intertwined. Look at this. Just 13% of voters think he'll board the battle bus at the next election. 18% of people, almost 1 in 5, think he'll be replaced as Prime Minister after the budget. And 32% think that the aftermath of next May's crucial local elections will bring him down. Altogether, 67% of all voters reckon Starmer will be gone before the general election, and Labour voters aren't much more optimistic. Robert.
Gosh, gripping stuff, Pippa. Becky, I've got to ask you first. I mean, genuinely, I never thought in my lifetime I would see a Chancellor more unpopular than Kwasi Kwarteng, but Rachel Reeves has somehow achieved that remarkable feat. How on earth has she got it so wrong?
I think we're all looking to next week's budget. A lot of the voters that I speak to in my constituency voted Labour because they wanted to see real change, but ultimately they wanted an improvement in their living standards. They knew the economic mess that we inherited. They knew it would take time to get the show on the road, as it were. But now we're 1 year in. We need to see those radical changes being made. We need to see things such as the 2-child cap on universal credit being scrapped so we can lift children out of poverty, and there's hopeful noises on that. We need to see action on lifting the minimum wage so that people have more money in their pocket, and we need to see money for investment in our public services, and that means looking at a fairer taxation system and looking at wealth taxes.
I mean, it sounds to me as though you're saying when voters say it's more, the fact that they're feeling no better off, and in some cases worse off, is more Rachel Reeves's fault than the previous government or than Trump. The voters are right to blame her.
I think it's quite a complex economic situation, but ultimately, when they voted Labour in that general election a year ago, they wanted things to change. They'd had 14 years of austerity, wages not improving in real terms since 2008. They wanted to see their living standards improve quickly. And unfortunately, we made a series of policy errors, as it were, not scrapping the 2-child cap, taking away the winter fuel allowance, looking at making disability cuts that eroded people's faith in our ability as a Labour government to improve living standards. And we had some other great policies that were overshadowed, such as our employment rights bill, sadly. But now we've got an opportunity to reset and to really prove that we are a Labour government, and a Labour government puts the interests of the people first. It makes sure that we develop an economic system that invests for the future, that improves quality of life and living standards, and makes sure that in this country we have a basic standard of living that's far superior to any country in the world.
Jacob, if I could just ask you about some things that you've been saying over the last 24, 48 hours. You've been saying that you believe that the way to regenerate this country is some kind of combined Conservative reform government. At least that's what I understood you to mean. How does that come about?
Well, I think that the Conservative Party and the Reform Party have a duty to come together because we are in a first-past-the-post system, which I fully support.
So it would have to be a pre-election pact, would it?
Well, my suggestion would be to look at what happened in 1918 in a coupon election, or if you want to be a bit more modern, in 1983 with the SDP Liberal Alliance, that you don't want to oppose each other, you want to maximise your vote. And I think it's better to do formal alliances than it is to do quiet, under-the-table agreements, which other parties certainly did at the last election.
And do you get any sense from your conversations with the leadership of the two parties that they're in the right kind of mindset yet?
I certainly get that impression from the membership. I was speaking to the Eastbourne Conservatives last week, and everybody there was saying to me, our two parties need to come together. The leadership can't say they want to do a deal until they do a deal, very much like David Cameron and Nick Clegg after the 2010 election.
So if Jacob's logic is correct, and I think many would agree with him, what does that, in your view, mean, Becky, in terms of how your party should think about approaching the next election? Because there are quite a lot of your colleagues who would like to see a so-called progressive alliance where you have some kind of formal or informal arrangement with the Lib Dems and the Greens. What would you think?
Well, firstly, I think a lot of us have been predicting this for some time, that the Conservatives and Reform will join before the next election, and we should be prepared for that. But ultimately...
So how do you see it off if you yourselves, are not prepared to work?
Well, ultimately, I think our offering as a Labour Party, as the true progressive voice in this country and the true voice of working people, it needs to be strong enough to stand on its own. And if other parties want to support us in that, then that's fine. But we need to be strong enough to stand on our own. But in order to do that, we've got to win the support and faith of our voters. And I think we've done so many things over the last year, as I said before, that have eroded that faith, that have just not been akin to what you would expect from a Labour government, such as not scrapping the 2-child cap, taking away the winter fuel allowance. And we know how difficult the economic situation is. But now we're 1 year in. We've got a chance to change our tune. We've got a chance to make those radical investment decisions and those bold policy decisions that will really improve living standards. And I know Darren will be desperate to talk about some of them tonight, but I think most within our party understand the position that we're in and that we've really got to get our game on now.
Thanks, Becky. Thanks, Jacob. We'll be back to you in a minute. As you've just heard from Becky, I'm delighted that we've been joined by the Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister, Darren Jones, very influential figure in the government. And I've just got to start with the events of the past fortnight. First thing to say to you is you must be relieved that in the past 24 hours there have been no unforced errors from your team. But how do you explain, frankly, what has felt like utter chaos, whether it was the briefings about a challenge to the leadership that looked to most of us to be fictitious, whether it's preparing all of us for a rise in the basic rate of income tax and then telling us that wouldn't happen, which just felt unstable. Why this degree of chaos?
Well, look, I mean, the briefings last week, the Prime Minister has been very clear as a distraction from his priority and the priority of the government, which is tackling the cost of living crisis that Becky was just talking about. And that's what the budget's going to be next week. It's going to be a Labour budget with Labour values and Labour choices that's going to be delivering on the Prime Minister's commitment of helping people in the short term as best we can with the cost of living crisis, but actually ensuring economic stability, inflation falling, interest rates falling, so that in the long term, people will see their wages improve, their living standards improve, and a more stable financial situation.
You slightly dodged what I was asking. I mean, one of the things actually many people just thought when you won that landslide, particularly when you won that landslide on the back of saying there would be no return to the chaos of the Tory years, we thought maybe government would get a bit boring. Well, it was anything but boring. And I mean, if anything, it was a bit too lively and stressful. I just wondered why you think things had fallen apart.
Well, look, I mean, if you talk about the budget, for example, we won an election very clearly last year, but that didn't wipe the slate clean. We inherited an enormous debt burden, high interest rates on government debt.
Sure, but I'm talking about contradictory briefings, and I'm talking about the briefings on the leadership. I'm not actually talking about the economic backdrop. These briefings are things that you control, and yet you didn't control them. This was madness.
I mean, look, if I could control briefings, there wouldn't be any. Let me assure you of that.
Any at all? That'd be the end of it.
None at
Silence.
all. That's why I didn't return your message the other day on WhatsApp. But look, the Prime Minister has been very, very clear that all of this is a distraction. We were elected on the promise of change because people wanted to see the country and their living standards improve. We have the enormous honour of being in government with a very large majority in the House of Commons, thanks to voters putting their trust in us. And we're going to be spending every minute of the day working really, really hard to deliver on that. And again, you're going to see that in the budget next week, a Labour budget with Labour values.
I might come back to that. Just one, before we get on to the issue of the economic backdrop, which I'm going to go to Pippa about in a second, can I just ask you a final question on this issue? Why did the Prime Minister feel he had to do that interview with the Daily Mirror in which he said he's definitely going to be there at the general election, given that most people would assume, given he won that enormous majority, that's not a question? Why did he have to reassure your party?
Well, look, I think the interview came out of the briefings last week, but like he said in the interview, these briefings are not what is important to him. What's important is getting on.
Well, they obviously are important enough because he thought he had to tell the world he's not being thrown out.
Well, he wasn't making those briefings last week. He was responding to them in the interview that he had. And look, you shouldn't underestimate Keir Starmer. He won the leadership of the Labour Party. He fixed the Labour Party. He brought Labour back into government after one of our worst defeats since our creation in the 1930s.
I'm not sure how many times you're going to say that this evening, but we've got that message. I don't know, Pippa, do you underestimate the Prime Minister? You're certainly going to show us some useful information.
Absolutely, Robert. After the hokey-cokey over the rise in income tax rates, Treasury insiders have told me that we should still expect a manifesto breach on tax, just a slightly subtler one. In last year's budget, Rachel Reeves ruled out extending the Tory freeze to income tax thresholds, saying it would hurt working people. Yet this time round, we know that she's planning to do just that. This chart from the IFS shows how when wages rise with inflation, but the thresholds stay the same, more people are dragged into paying the 40p rate. This started in 2021 and is supposed to end in 2028, but Reeves is planning to extend it for 2 more years. Now, the turquoise line shows that what the higher rate would be, around £62,000, if it had carried on rising in line with inflation. Instead, look at the pink line here. The threshold currently kicks in at just over £50,000, and by the end of the decade, under the Chancellor's plan, this would hit £46,000 in today's prices. This yellow line shows the income of somebody who's just joined the top quarter of all taxpayers. It would come within £1,000 of the higher rate. In the early 1990s, less than 4% of the population paid that. Under Reeves's plan, almost a quarter of earners will. Now look at this yellow line. With the tax-free personal allowance also frozen, more people will pay tax, including those who receive the full state pension, the pink line here, creeping up. What does that all mean for your monthly payslip? Well, this chart shows how much more tax both basic rate in pink and higher rate taxpayers in green will pay each year. The existing freeze from when Reeves entered office means a small rise at both rates. But look how much tax goes up under the new plan. Those on basic rate will owe over £400 more by 2030, while those on the higher rate will pay over £1,100 more. As you can see, the Chancellor's promise to protect working people is being stretched to its limit. For his analysis, Matt Alton of the IFS is our
Geek of the Week.
God, I love a Geek of the Week. So, we've played this game many times. I'm not going to ask you what's in the budget before you tell me. You're not going to tell me what's in the budget. Yeah. But what I am going to ask you is about what the Chancellor said in her last budget, which was, she did say, and we checked the words, that freezing thresholds for 2 more years would be a breach of the manifesto. Would it be a breach of the manifesto were it theoretically to happen?
That was a very clever attempt at trying to get me to speculate on
No, it's not. It's
in the budget next week.
Not that.
It was. It was. You're asking me about what might be in the budget next week and what my response.
All right, I'm going to rephrase it. If she had frozen the thresholds last year, would she have broken the manifesto?
Well, we know what the Chancellor did in the budget last year.
And she said that if she'd done that, that would have breached the manifesto. So the logic is, if she does it at any point, it's a breach of the manifesto. Do you accept that logic?
You're applying logic to something that's not even happened yet. The budget is next Wednesday on the 26th of November, and I'll be very happy to come back.
Everybody watching will think this is a completely absurd answer you've just given me. So I'm going to ask you something else. You, however, you yourself are on the record as saying that anyone with a pay slip is a working person. Do you still think anybody with a pay slip is a working person?
Yeah, because if you go to work, you get paid and you get a payslip.
Right.
I don't know why this is a particularly difficult
because there
concept.
are some of your colleagues who define a working person by the level of income that they earn. You're saying anybody who gets a payslip, irrespective of how much they earn, is a working person. Because, of course, the point is that your manifesto, I'm going to go back to it, says you would not put up taxes for working people. So you're basically saying if there is an increase in direct taxes on anybody, that's a breach of the manifesto.
That is a very convoluted way of, I think, trying to ask me again what might be in the budget.
No, it's not.
I think the idea
Pippa,
of someone...
am I asking what's in the budget?
No, absolutely not.
It was a very long...
It's all about...
It was a very long question. I'm a simple man. Maybe ask me again in a shorter version. Look, when people go to work, they get a salary. If they get a salary, they get a pay slip. That's someone that goes to work. I don't think it's a complicated idea.
Can I just, Becky made this very impassioned plea that this is not to ask you what's precisely in the budget, but she fundamentally thinks that you've got to move to the left in a whole range of policies in the budget. Will you do that?
Look, you can be on the far left of politics or the far right of politics, to pick 2 examples. That doesn't change the world that we live in. Okay. The fact is, the country is burdened with debt after 14 years of failure from the Tories. That debt is expensive. We spend over £100 billion a year paying debt interest when we would rather be spending that on the NHS. The world economy has changed. It's gone from free trade as the assumed principle to now one where there are lots of tariffs. Defence spending's having to increase because of wars on Europe that we've not had to deal with since the Cold War. These are the facts of life, and it actually doesn't matter what party's in government. You've got to deal with those issues. What matters is the choices you make within those real-world constraints. And for us, that's going to be a Labour budget with Labour values that you will see next week that will look different as a consequence within those constraints than the choices you might get from the Conservatives or Reform, or indeed the Green Party.
Now, I want to get off this whole issue of taxes in just 1 second to go on to something I'm confident you will tell us about, because it's slap bang in the middle of what you're supposedly responsible for. But before we get on to that, you may have seen, we did this very interesting story about a gambling company called Sky Bet, which is owned by one of the biggest gambling companies called Flutter. It's moved some of its operations to Malta. Gordon Brown, your you never served under him as Prime Minister, but he was a Labour Prime Minister. He is really worried they're engaging in the kind of tax avoidance he thinks those sorts of companies shouldn't engage in. Do you think this is something that should be looked at?
Look, I think businesses who operate in this country and make profits from the British people should pay taxes in Britain. I think that's a general principle that most people would get behind.
Now, the thing I do want to ask you about is you, according to a readout from the Cabinet, made a very striking, you said something very striking about the digital ID card that you're working to try and introduce. You said that you were in favour of, these are apparently your words, killing the legacy state and building a new one.
Not quite right. Not quite right. So what I was
What
talking...
did you actually say?
Well, let me just
and
say...
what does it mean?
Sure, let me say two things. One, we're not producing ID cards. That is not the government policy. What we're saying is you need to be able to log in to a government app and prove who you are if you want to access services online in the future.
Is that not a digital ID card?
No, you're not going to have a card. You don't.
But it's a digital version of it. We've all got digital cards on our phones of various sorts.
It's just logging in and proving who you are, and it's your choice if you want to use it. But what I was referring to in Cabinet was all of our public services, other than maybe the Passport Office and I think possibly the driving licence scheme, they're pretty rubbish. Anyone that tries to get hold of the government on the telephone with paperwork, having to tell your story 5 or 6 times to different people in different places, it's enormously frustrating. It also means public services are more expensive to run than they need to.
But do you need to have a digital ID to fix any of this
Well, what
stuff?
we can do is if you digitise public services, deliver it to people through their mobile app in the same way you do with your banking services or your
Why does
shopping.
it need a digital ID?
Well, because you have to log in. I mean, the way you log into your bank or you're logging to your Asda shopping app or whatever it is
you're
you
now
do.
defining the digital ID as just a single log-on for all your services. It's no more than that. It's not going to prove your identity in any shape or form other than to access services.
Yeah, to access public services, yeah. And it's up to you whether you want to use it or not. You can be on the phone and use the paperwork, but if actually you'd like to be able to access public services more quickly and more efficiently at a time that suits you, then that is going to be a great thing. And my reference in Cabinet was the old state, the status quo, it is not good enough. So what I want to do is build the new state, and what I said was close down the legacy state. And I think that's a great offer to people across the country who are paying for us to provide these services to them.
Now, finally, unfortunately, we are almost out of time. I'm not sure I completely trust all the data that comes out of the Office for National Statistics, but they have recently said that far more people left the UK, British citizens, than they'd thought, 250,000 over the past year. Why do you think so many people are leaving the UK?
No idea. I haven't seen the data. Did they say why?
No, they didn't say why. They just, I mean, I'd hope, given you're supposed to know everything about government. I
don't know everything.
But you're supposed to.
Well,
I thought you were across every department.
Well, I tried to be, but I can't possibly.
All right, final question then. What is your job?
Well, I've got 4. I've got 4 jobs. So I'm the Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister. Which
what does that mean?
So I spend about a day and a half, 2 days a week on average in Number 10 with the Prime Minister, supporting him on broadly domestic policy for the UK.
So that's making sure what he wants to happen happens.
Yeah, it's delivery, basically. So I spend a chunk of my time each week in Number 10 with him. The second half of my time, I run the Cabinet Office, so I'm responsible for national security, coordination, and those types of things. I'm the Minister for Intergovernmental Relations, so I support our colleagues in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Yeah. And most importantly, I'm the Member of Parliament for Bristol North West, which is my home, and I still do my constituency work, as you would expect, every week.
Well, it's an absolute miracle you found the time to come on the show. We're very, very grateful. It was lovely to see you, as always. And I'll put different versions of the questions I've just put to you after the budget, see if you can answer them.
I would love to.
All right, very good to see you. Becky, very quickly, I've got to come on to you. When you heard Darren stressing what he regards as the great debt problem that we face, I might have felt, if I were you, that the Chancellor's very unlikely to do much of what you want.
Well, I'll remain hopeful. I think one fact remains is that there is a huge hole in the public finances, and if the Chancellor is serious about sustainable growth, we're going to have to see sustainable funding put into our public services so that they can provide all of the support that businesses need, that individuals need to get good jobs and all of the rest of it, and as well as making sure that our NHS is fit for purpose, our schools, you name it. And to do that, she's going to have to look at different ways to raise revenue. One thing that I think she should look at are wealth taxes. So, for example, it's absurd that we're in a tax system at the moment where tax on income on wages is taxed at a greater level than tax on wealth. That's not fair. So that needs to be looked at by the Chancellor. And there's a group called Patriotic Millionaires that I've mentioned on this show before that have done a huge amount of work on a whole range of permutations of different types of wealth taxes the Chancellor could look at, and she could raise up to £60 billion a year. And staggeringly, 80% of UK millionaires support wealth taxes, as well as the majority of the British public. So it's a vote winner, as well as a winner for our public finances. So I hope Rachel will be bold next week and look at making some of those decisions.
Pretty certain Jacob doesn't support a wealth tax, but I want to ask you about something else that I raised with Darren. And I don't know if you trust Office of National Statistics numbers, but if
I saw Darren's eyebrows reach the ceiling when you asked him if he trusted ONS.
Yeah, it was an interesting moment. Why do you think, if the numbers are right, so many people appear to be leaving the UK at the moment?
Well, there seems to be a natural level of taxation which this country can't get above, and that seems to be 38% of GDP. And that people have been hearing stories that make them think that tax rates are going up. They heard that there might be an exit tax, and they're rearranging their affairs because the richest in society are extraordinarily mobile. You must remember that 1% of taxpayers are now paying 30% of income tax, and that 1% is the most mobile 1%. So I think we are seeing a lot of well-to-do people leaving because of what has happened and what they are worried is going to happen, and they're getting their financial affairs in order early.
Would you ever think about leaving?
Oh, I couldn't possibly leave, no.
So patriotism comes for you?
No, well, I'd have to leave Somerset, and that would be a frightful bore. I'm not. I mean, I worked in Hong Kong for a few years when I was young, but I'm not young anymore.
Becky, you're very reassured by that, aren't you? And maybe it reinforces your case, because maybe there are more patriots than...
Well, he's a good lad if he's staying in the country and paying his taxes like he should. But I don't buy the argument that we'd see capital flight if we imposed a range of wealth taxes. We've not seen that in France, for example, where they introduced a wealth tax. You did see a small number of quite high-profile millionaires leave, but it was negligible compared to the amount of millionaires that were in France. So I think if we get it right and we make sure that HMRC are equipped to
capital taxes are
recoup
dreadful
the tax.
taxes. They have the greatest effect on economic activity for the lowest amount of revenue. The government needs a certain amount of revenue. I accept that, but it gets it much more effectively from income taxes and value-added taxes, from sales taxes, things that have a direct transaction associated with them. Wealth taxes create enormous distortions, as we've seen with the death taxes on farms and on businesses.
Anyway, what you both proved to me is, my goodness, it's going to be an interesting debate next Wednesday. Now, I've just got to say thanks to Darren for joining us. And as I've just mentioned, there's going to be an enormous amount to unpack after next week's budget. We've got a special show as always. And if you're too gripped by what's happening at the middle of the day when the Chancellor announces her measures, you don't have to wait till 11ish to watch us on ITV. You can tune in to our live broadcast on YouTube and at X at 9 o'clock. And the key thing to do is to subscribe over at ITV Peston and turn on the notifications so you don't miss us going live. Loads more tonight, though. After the break, we'll see what Becky and Jacob made of, well, that other enormous story, which is the government's new crackdown, Shabana Mahmood's new crackdown, new restrictions on people applying for asylum. And we will be joined. How am I going to describe Piers Morgan? I'm going to describe in a way that you'll probably balk at a YouTuber. See you in a minute.
Welcome to the break. And in celebration of Piers' new book, we're going to play a game of woke or not woke. And all you need to do is say whether you think the following things are woke or not. Let's see what's up first. King Charles, Piers, let's start with you. Woke or not?
He's quite woke.
He's quite woke. Jacob?
King, he's not woke.
Not woke.
Definitely
Becky,
not.
you've got the deciding vote on this.
He's not woke.
Not woke
He is
either.
not.
OK, Arsenal. Obviously, we need to ask you this. Woke or not woke? North London Club, do you go out for a sort of...
We're kind of woke in the old-fashioned sense of the word. So if it comes to raising awareness of social and racial injustice, rather like our great king, then they're woke. If it's by the modern-day standards of wokeism, which is basically borderline fascism, no.
Right, OK, well, that's one interpretation. What do you think, Jacob? Arsenal Football Club?
I know nothing about football, but it's got a cannon on it, and cannons are, as a general rule, not very woke.
And Becky?
I don't know anything about them, to be honest, to decide.
We'll let you off that one then. Let's quickly run through another couple. Woke or not woke? John Lewis ads. Woke or not?
Oh, very woke, yeah.
Yep.
I agree with Piers.
Woke.
I don't think they're that woke.
Not woke, says Becky. Quite divisive.
Just
And
to
the
be
last
clear,
one.
Becky wouldn't think
Last
anything
one.
woke.
No, you think everything's woke.
10
you
seconds
do.
for this. Robert Peston. Woke or not woke?
I don't think he's that woke. We're about
Oh,
to
I'm
find
so bloody woke. You're going to find out in a minute, Piers, how woke I am.
He's definitely woke. He's presenting a TV programme wearing his running shoes.
Piers can see under the
Got
desk.
it.
Becky?
Not woke.
Not woke. All right, thanks very much then.
Let me know. Welcome back. We're going to have Piers Morgan on Trump in a minute or two, but Pippa, you've got some other stuff to share with us.
Yeah. On Monday, the Home Secretary announced sweeping reforms to the asylum system. Much of the focus was on the parts that might appeal to reform voters. But lots of Labour MPs, anxious over what it might mean, clung to the promise of new safe and legal routes. In the year to June 2025, this whole bar here, almost 112,000 people claimed asylum in the UK. Almost 56,000 of them came via irregular routes, the bit in blue, which was mostly small boats, and 41,000 claimed asylum on an existing visa. Shabana Mahmood wants this to stop, and for people to use safe and legal routes, this block here in green. Over that same period, almost 62,000 people followed those. This chart shows the breakdown. The biggest slice is family reunion visas, over 20,000 people. But this was suspended in September with a new scheme not coming in until next spring. A similar number came from Hong Kong, and around 15,000 are refugees fleeing from the war in Ukraine. The Afghan settlement programme is winding down, but 6,500 people still came in under that scheme. This leaves only 872 people coming in from elsewhere. Mahmood says she'll cap the number of refugees, but the detail is yet to come, and Labour MPs are watching closely. So, Becky, are you reasonably or at all reassured by what the Home Secretary has announced?
I've got a number of concerns. I don't think there's any Labour MP who doesn't want to see a fair, compassionate, but also robust immigration system that vets people that come into this country properly. And what we heard from the Home Secretary, essentially there was a number of gaps. So, for example, she referred to safe routes. Now, one of the reasons that we know that refugees take to the sea in dinghies and put their lives at risk when they've been through horrific situations across the world is because legally, if there are no safe routes or ways for them to apply from other countries in the world, their only way of seeking refugee status is to set foot on our shore. And that means that we've got people arriving and we don't know who they are, we don't know whether they're foreign criminals, we don't know whether they're bogus asylum seekers or whether they're genuine refugees. If there were safe routes, people wouldn't have to get in boats, they'd be able to apply, be assessed, be vetted properly and receive the support and sanctuary that they deserved if they were a genuine refugee. Now, all refugee charities are calling for safe routes. And on Monday, we heard the Home Secretary talk about the importance of safe routes, that's right, but the safe route that she referred to was only going to be 500 people. Yeah. And I don't think that will deter people from coming to the UK.
So it sounds like you don't think it's generous enough. What should the number be? How many people should come in under that route?
I think there needs to be, and this is part of a wider debate, so our obligations under the Refugee Convention essentially state, and this is all countries across the world who are part of it, that we need to offer sanctuary to those who are genuine refugees and not send them back to countries where they will be unsafe or in danger. But for that to work and for us to have faith in that, there has to be international agreement about a fair system, and we don't have that at the moment. Now, interestingly, the UK is not the top in terms of numbers of the asylum seekers that we take here in the UK, but that still doesn't change how people feel about the way the system works. And I think internationally we could do a lot more on the world stage to develop that system that people have faith in. But ultimately we can't forget that, one, we need to have a system that's robust and doesn't let foreign criminals in and make sure that we're kept safe as a country. But we've also got to recognise that refugees, genuine refugees, are desperate people who are fleeing horrific situations. And if we do anything in this debate, it's to inject compassion and humanity into the situation.
So I do want to ask you, Jacob. I mean, we are, you know, our history has been to show that kind of compassion towards people who are in real trouble in the rest of the world and have taken them in and absorbed them. Are you not at all concerned about us turning our backs? I mean, you have to look at what's going on in Sudan at the moment to be absolutely horrified at the atrocities that are being committed there. Should we really be just turning our back on such desperate people?
The numbers have simply got too large, and we cannot take any more people. We had, under the new figures from the ONS, nearly 950,000 people come in a single year. And
yeah, but
therefore,
hang on.
Yeah.
That was
Those
were
total.
Boris's authorised. That was nothing to do with asylum seekers.
That was total. Some of those were asylum seekers.
Well,
that's
a very
the total
small
figure.
proportion.
But the number of people coming into this country, legally or illegally, is too large, and that has to stop. That's why the Rwanda scheme was such a good one, because it meant there was somewhere safe for people to go, but they wouldn't come here as economic migrants because they didn't want to go to Rwanda. That was the benefit of it as a deterrent. And the people coming on in over small boats have got to France already, and that they've got to a safe country. However rude one wants to be about the French for eating garlic and things like that, France is a safe country. And we don't have any obligation to take people from France, and we shouldn't do it. And we should pull out of the European Convention on Human Rights and the Refugee Convention, because there's something like 700 million people worldwide, I think the Centre for Policy Studies worked this out, who potentially have a right to come to the UK. Well, we can't increase our population tenfold.
We might come back to this a little bit later in the later part of my conversation with Piers, because I think it is actually slightly relevant to some of the things you discuss in this book we're going to talk about later, your book called Woke is Dead. But I want to actually start with...
Good evening, by the way.
Very lovely to see you. Thank you very much for joining us.
And to my fellow guests, and to you.
For joining us tonight, Piers. You've been close to Donald Trump for many years. How will he be feeling about what looks like the imminent release of the so-called Epstein files? Will he be anxious?
I think the whole thing is slightly inexplicable, because before the election, Donald Trump and all of his team were very clear. If we get the presidency back, we will be fully transparent with the Epstein files. They will all be released. No more hiding place for the people who may have committed crimes with all these girls who've been abused. And once they won the election, the same happened. I had some of his administration on my show, Uncensored, and they were saying, we're going to release all the files. Then we had this bizarre thing with Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, where all these influencers got invited to go and see her to be given the files, only for it not to be the files. Then Elon Musk, you may remember, who's now back in with Trump, was at this dinner with the Saudi Crown Prince last night. He fell out with Trump a few months ago, and out of nowhere, on his X platform, and says, breaking news, you know, Trump's in the Epstein files, that's why they're not being released, and so on. And then the investigation got shut down. Now, from public pressure, a lot of it interestingly driven by MAGA people who expected the transparency from their guy and didn't get it. Now you've seen Congress sign off on this bill. It's now with Donald Trump. They said they will apparently sign it off within 30 days. We don't know if there are going to be redactions. If there are, will that raise more conspiracy theories? So my answer is, I don't know what's happened here to take us in a position where we're going to reveal it all.
Look, you've known him, and you're, you know, an intelligent analyst. Is it possible that he just forgot how implicated he was? Because it is weird.
I don't think it's that. I interviewed Virginia Giuffre's longtime attorney, David Boies, one of the most brilliant, you know, criminal lawyers that America's had in modern times. this is a few weeks ago, he was clear, he'd seen the files. He said there was nothing that implicates Trump criminally personally. But there is but there is stuff, he said, which will incriminate, potentially for criminal prosecution, between 6 and 12 high-profile men. We don't know who they are yet. I would posit a theory that it's not Trump worrying about himself so much as potentially worrying about who those other people are. Are they friends of his? Are they business associates? We just don't know. But it's very strange. The reason I painted out the journey for people is we've gone from a position of we're going to give you everything to we're giving you nothing to now we've been forced to give you everything. And I think the only answer is literally give us everything. Otherwise, the conspiracies are just going to keep raging.
And on another rather striking thing that happened yesterday, I genuinely was shocked about the astonishingly rude things that Trump said about the murdered Saudi commentator Khashoggi, the extraordinarily positive things he said about the Saudi leader MBS. Was any of that a surprise to you?
It's Trump. Okay, it's not, as my daughter, who's 13, put it to me recently. She said, I keep hearing you describe Donald Trump as a unique character. Is there such a thing as being too unique? Which I thought was a good description. He's never going to change. He's nearly 80. He's a trash-talking New York real estate magnate who became the most powerful guy in the world. And yeah, he says stuff occasionally that makes me wince, makes most people wince. He does other things which I think are very effective by using the same blunt instrument technique. I would say, not as a defense, but as an explanation for why he is so rude to journalists in America, is that he has spent years being called a Nazi and a fascist by many of them, and I don't believe he's either a Nazi or a fascist. So I do think if you're going to get those kind of attacks, then calling somebody a little piggy may be indelicate and I think ungentlemanly, but it's not as bad as being called a Nazi.
Well, we might pick up on some of that in just a minute. So don't go away. Lots more from Piers, Becky and Jacob in just a minute or two. See you in a second.
Welcome to the break. Now, Piers, you love a bet. You're a betting man, I think.
I do like a little bet.
I remember you famously...
Do you want my odds on Keir Starmer surviving the...
Well, we might come to that in a minute. But you...
Odds on gone by May would just be my assessment.
Gone by May, yes. Well, you saw the odds earlier on, I'm sure, in the poll that we had. But you obviously also bet Rishi Sunak £1,000 that...
He's never paid, by the way.
He's not paid,
and I won that bet.
Well, you should get... I mean, he's certainly got £1,000, so you should get onto him. This was... the government wouldn't send asylum seekers to Rwanda before the 2024 general election. Maybe Jacob can sub him.
Well, you've probably got a few, Bob, haven't you, Jacob?
and not with these tax rates.
Anyway, we've got a few scenarios we'd like you to bet on. Who's going to be president in 2029? Trump, JD Vance, Gavin Newsom, AOC and Marco Rubio.
Of those five, I would say Vance is the favourite.
Vance's favourite. Jacob?
I think that must be right.
I think
all three of you agree on that one. OK, next one. Who is going to be the Labour leader? You think Keir Starmer will go. Who's going to be the Labour leader, do you think, going into the next election?
I would say this lady.
Shabana
I think
Mahmood.
she's turned out, I would say, to be the most effective communicator they have. And I think that will resonate with people. And I do think there's going to be a vacancy sooner rather than later.
Becky, do you agree? Shabana Mahmood, the next Labour leader?
God, I don't know. It could be King of the North.
What about your flatmate, Angie, your old flatmate?
I don't know.
No, she's not answering. Jacob, what do you reckon?
No, she said the King of the North.
She said the King of the North. Yeah. She did say Andy Burnham, King of the North.
It's going to be Ed Miliband, who's the most popular. I know he's not there, but he's the most popular with Labour list. And once people think there's a winner, the Labour MPs will go for him.
OK, great. Well, we're going to have a quick fire round now. Mandami maintaining his popularity in New York over the next year. Yes or no?
No.
No?
Oh, I think he will. I think he'll have a fight with Trump, and New Yorkers will quite like that.
Oh, right, OK.
I think he will.
OK, and I think... OK, do one very last quick one.
Oh, you missed the Ashes.
England to win the Ashes,
This is
come
what
on.
I need to get to. England to win the Ashes.
100%, yes.
Definitely.
We're on this.
Definitely.
I was watching Jofra Archer peppering Joe Root today.
Scotland
the
to
Ashes
win the
are
World
coming
Cup.
home.
Scotland to win the World Cup. There we are.
More chance of me becoming Pope.
Too late, it's gone.
Welcome back. Piers is still with me. We're going to talk a little bit about your book, Woke is Dead, subtitled How Common Sense Triumph in an Age of Total Madness. I'm not 100% that I agree that common sense has
Well,
triumphed.
let me clarify. I don't actually say it's dead, but what has died...
Hang on. I know. Descriptions
I know.
here.
If you read the book, and I urge you to buy it in all good bookshops, the premise of the book is that I believe public tolerance of wokeism has died. And I would cite what's happened with, say, Graham Linehan recently, where a comedian gets arrested by 5 armed police at Heathrow over jokes, inappropriate or whatever you want to think of them, that he put on X a few months before. And 2 or 3 years ago, the public would have just gone along with this. He would have been a social pariah, etc., etc. This time round, the police not only concluded, after a massive backlash from almost everybody, that this was a massive overreach, they weren't going to prosecute him, but they went further and said, we're never going to prosecute again people that do this kind of thing. That's what I mean by woke is dead. It will pop up like whack-a-mole, but the public tolerance of this has disintegrated.
I mean, part of the problem with this debate is, frankly, there is no very clear consensus on what woke is. But can I just ask both of you, do you agree with Piers that whatever you think woke is in retreat?
I never liked the word woke anyway. I just think don't be racist, don't be discriminatory. It's not difficult. But, being kind of like overly sensitive is not something that, people should make a huge issue of.
Jacob, if you look at the surge in support for reform, some of that will be to do with disillusionment with your party, the Tories, and their many people think their incompetence in government. Some will see its disillusionment with Labour. But a lot of it is a kind of identity anti-woke politics.
Yeah, no, I think Piers is right. I think the way he defines it is absolutely spot on, that the public always thought woke was nonsense, but they now have the courage to say so. And I think J.K. Rowling's been very important in that, in being a figure that people respected, who basically said the emperor's got no clothes, and then people up and down the country felt it was respectable to think that a man was a man and a woman was a woman. And they'd always thought it, but they were just a bit nervous about saying it.
In 20 years' time, we are going to look back in 20 years' time.
I agree with that.
And people will be going, hang on a second.
Mad.
There was a period in British modern history where we allowed biological males to compete in women's sport, when we all know the reason we separate the sexes in sport is because biological males have a physical advantage. And they will think we lost our collective minds. And that, I'm afraid, is at the forefront of wokeism. Right. It's a refusal to accept basic common sense.
But I've got to ask you, therefore, on some of the Trump agenda. So Trump says that the kind of programmes that many companies had to make sure that there were more people at a higher position in their institutions from ethnic minorities and more women being represented, he's against all of that.
So am I. Turned out to be complete nonsense. That's why they've all...
So you're against all of that as well?
I think the whole concept of DEI turned out to be built on sand. Right? DEI turned out to be like the Holy Roman Empire, as Steven Pinker put it last week, which turned out to be neither Holy Roman or an empire. But it was neither diverse, equitable or inclusive.
No, but I've got to come to Becky on this. I mean, surely it is, from your point of view, common sense that there's been an enormous amount of discrimination against people from different backgrounds, and that it's a good thing that a lot of that has been reversed.
It is a good thing. And I mean, we referenced the trans issue here. There's a lot of commentators across the media that have become obsessed with this issue. It's a tiny minority of people in this country who face discrimination. And for most people, when I talk to constituents about the issue, it's like, well, just let people live their lives if they want.
Have you actually asked women what they think of that issue?
No, if I talk to a constituency about it. No, if I talk to...
This line that nobody cares, come on.
No, don't interrupt me, Piers. So constituents genuinely just want people to live their own lives. But they also
not at the expense of women's rights.
They also want to feel safe.
But I've just been talking about women's rights, and a part of DEI is making sure women get the opportunities that they deserve.
DEI turned out to be neither diverse, equitable or inclusive. It became the opposite of what it set out to do, which is the problem with wokeism. It's in the end became a form of fascism.
Jacob.
It was wicked. Universities such as Harvard discriminated against Asian and Jewish applicants because they were outperforming, and they therefore set a higher bar for them. It became discriminatory. And that it's going and that people can compete on merit is absolutely marvellous.
OK, I mean, we're also trying to focus it here in the UK. But, I mean, actually, I'm going to ask you, Pippa, do you think that when it comes to sort of fairly basic anti-discrimination stuff, that's in retreat, and that should be seen as woke?
I think it does feel like it's in retreat. And I'm somebody who thinks that actually it's really important in the world in which we live in, where there is this rising tide, particularly in the populist right, to make sure that vulnerable people aren't abandoned to that and are defended and supported. Whether Piers describes that as woke or not, I mean, I think there are genuine questions around single-sex spaces for women, prisons and sport, for example. But I also think that trans people are some of the most vulnerable people out there who get way more abuse than pretty much every other or many other sections of society. And I think it's really important that they are also treated with respect and dignity. It shouldn't be deemed,
Pippa. I understand that, and I absolutely respect trans people's rights to exist and to have the same rights to fairness, equality and safety that we all have, not at the expense of eroding women's rights. That was always the debate that J.K. Rowling and others very courageously led. And I think that was the problem with it. It's where you've campaigned for a certain group to have rights, but at the expense of other people's rights, which in the case of women's rights were incredibly hard fought for 100 years. And, you know, I found it absolutely terrifying that I would have famous women on my show who would not answer the question, what is a woman? Because they were terrified, as they said to me afterwards, of putting their head over the parapet and being gunned.
Right, we've had a very lively conversation. Unfortunately, I have got to bring it to an end there. That's it. Next week, we will have a massive show, another massive show, analysing what may be the most important budget since the 2008 financial crisis, because it'll determine not only whether the economy can be rehabilitated, but whether the Chancellor and Prime Minister can keep their jobs. Don't miss it. See you then. Bye-bye.